Section 7 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tasha Hobbs Peterson. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 7. The Story of Prince Ahmed and the Fairy Pari Bano, Part 4. Prince Ahmed went the next morning with the same attendants as before, but much more magnificently mounted, equipped, and dressed, and was received by the Sultan with the same joy and satisfaction. For several months he constantly paid him visits, and always in a richer and more brilliant equipage. At last the Sultan's favourites, who judged of Prince Ahmed's power by the splendour of his appearance, abused the privilege the Sultan accorded them of speaking to him with freedom, to make him jealous of his son. They represented that it was but common prudence to discover where the prince had retired, and how he could afford to live so magnificently, since he had no revenue assigned for his expenses, that he seemed to come to court only to insult him, by affecting to shew that he wanted nothing from his father to enable him to live like a prince, and that it was to be feared he might court the people's favour and dethrone him. The Sultan of the Indies was so far from thinking that Prince Ahmed could be capable of so wicked a design, that he said to them in displeasure, "You are mistaken, my son loves me, and I am the more assured of his tenderness and fidelity, as I have given him no reason to be disgusted." At these words one of the favourites took an opportunity to say, "Your Majesty, in the opinion of the most sensible people, could not have taken a better method than you did with the three princes, respecting their marriage with the Princess Nouronihar. But who knows whether Prince Ahmed has submitted to his fate with the same resignation as Prince Hussein? May not he imagine that he alone deserved her, and that your Majesty, by leaving the match to be decided by chance, has done him injustice? Your Majesty may say," added the malicious favourite, "that Prince Ahmed has manifested no appearance of dissatisfaction, that our fears are vain, that we are too easily alarmed, and are to blame in suggesting to you suspicions of this kind, which may perhaps be unfounded, against a prince of your blood. But, sir," pursued the favourite, "it may be also that these suspicions are well grounded. Your Majesty must be sensible that in so nice and important an affair you cannot be too much on your guard, and should take the safest course. Consider, it is the prince's interest to dissemble, amuse, and deceive you, and the danger is the greater, as he resides not far from your capital, and if your Majesty give but the same attention that we do, you may observe that every time he comes his attendants are different, their habits new, and their arms clean and bright, as if just come from the maker's hands, and their horses look as if they had only been walked out. These are sufficient proofs that Prince Ahmed does not travel far, so that we should think ourselves wanting in our duty did we not make our humble remonstrances, in order that, for your own preservation and the good of your people, your Majesty may take such measures as you shall think advisable." When the favourite had concluded these insinuations, the Sultan said, "I do not believe my son Ahmed is so wicked as you would persuade me he is. However, I am obliged to you for your advice, and do not doubt that it proceeds from good intention and loyalty to my person." The Sultan of the Indies said this, that his favourites might not know the impressions their observations had made on his mind. He was, however, so much alarmed by them, that he resolved to have Prince Ahmed watched unknown to his Grand Vizier. For this end he sent for the sorceress, who was introduced by a private door into his closet. "You told me the truth," said he, "when you assured me my son Ahmed was alive, for which I am obliged to you. You must do me another kindness. I have seen him since, and he comes to my court every month. But I cannot learn from him where he resides, and do not wish to force his secret from him, but believe you are capable of satisfying my curiosity, without letting him or any of my court know anything of the discovery. You know that he is at this time with me, and usually departs without taking leave of me or any of my court. Place yourself immediately upon the road, and watch him so as to find out where he retires, and bring me information." The sorceress left the Sultan, and knowing the place where Prince Ahmed had found his arrow, went immediately thither, and concealed herself near the rocks so as not to be seen. The next morning Prince Ahmed set out by daybreak, without taking leave either of the Sultan or any of his court, according to custom. The sorceress, seeing him coming, followed him with her eyes, till suddenly she lost sight of him and his attendants. The steepness of the rocks formed an insurmountable barrier to men, whether on horseback or on foot, so that the sorceress judged that the prince retired either into some cavern or some subterraneous place, the abode of genies or fairies. When she thought the prince and his attendants must have far advanced into whatever concealment they inhabited, she came out of the place where she had hidden herself, and explored the hollow way where she had lost sight of them. She entered it, and proceeding to the spot where it terminated after many windings, looked carefully on all sides, but notwithstanding all her acuteness, she could perceive no opening, nor the iron gate which Prince Ahmed had discovered, for this door was to be seen by or opened to none but men, and only to those whose presence was agreeable to the fairy Pari Bano, but not at all to women. The sorceress, who saw it was in vain for her to search any farther, was obliged to be satisfied with the insufficient discovery she had made, and returned to communicate it to the Sultan. When she had told him what she had explored, she added, "Your Majesty may easily understand, after what I have had the honor to tell you, that it will be no difficult matter to obtain you the satisfaction you desire concerning Prince Ahmed's conduct. To do this, I only ask time, that you will have patience and give me leave to act, without inquiring what measures I design to take." The Sultan was pleased with the conduct of the sorceress, and said to her, "Do as you think fit. I will wait patiently the event of your promises." And to encourage her, he presented her with a diamond of great value, telling her it was only an earnest of the ample recompense she should receive when she should have performed the important service which he left to her management. As Prince Ahmed, after he had obtained the fairy Pari Bano's leave, never failed once a month to visit his father, the sorceress, knowing the time, went a day or two before to the foot of the rock where she had lost sight of him and his attendants, and waited there to execute the project she had formed. The next morning Prince Ahmed went out as usual at the iron gate, with the same attendants as before, passed the sorceress, and seeing her lie with her head on the rock, complaining as if she was in great pain, he pitied her, turned his horse, and asked what he could do to relieve her. The artful sorceress, without lifting up her head, looked at the prince in such a manner as to increase his compassion, and answered in broken accents and sighs, as if she could hardly breathe, that she was going to the city, but in the way was taken with so violent a fever that her strength failed her, and she was forced to stop and lie down where he saw her, far from any habitation, and without any hopes of assistance. "Good woman," replied the prince, "you are not so far from help as you imagine. I will assist you, and convey you where you shall not only have all possible care taken of you, but where you will find a speedy cure. Rise, and let one of my people take you behind him." At these words the sorceress, who pretended sickness only to explore where the prince resided, and his situation, did not refuse the charitable offer, and to shew her acceptance rather by her actions than her words, made many affected efforts to rise, pretending that the violence of her illness prevented her. At the same time, 2 of the prince's attendants, alighting, helped her up and placed her behind another. They mounted their horses again and followed the prince, who turned back to the iron gate, which was opened by one of his retinue. When he came into the outward court of the fairy's palace, without dismounting himself, he sent to tell her he wanted to speak with her. The fairy came with all imaginable haste, not knowing what had made Prince Ahmed return so soon, who, not giving her time to ask, said, "My princess, I desire you would have compassion on this good woman," pointing to the sorceress, who was taken off the horse by 2 of his retinue. "I found her in the condition you see her, and promised her the assistance she requires. I recommend her to your care, and am persuaded that you, from inclination as well as my request, will not abandon her." The fairy, who had her eyes fixed on the pretended sick woman all the time the prince was speaking, ordered 2 of her women to take her from the men who supported her, conduct her into an apartment of the palace, and take as much care of her as they would of herself. Whilst the 2 women were executing the fairy's commands, she went up to Prince Ahmed, and whispering him in the ear, said, "Prince, I commend your compassion, which is worthy of you and your birth. I take great pleasure in gratifying your good intention. But permit me to tell you I am afraid it will be but ill rewarded. This woman is not so sick as she pretends to be, and I am much mistaken if she is not sent hither on purpose to occasion you great trouble. But do not be concerned, let what will be devised against you. Be persuaded that I will deliver you out of all the snares that shall be laid for you. Go and pursue your journey." This address of the fairies did not in the least alarm Prince Ahmed. "My princess," said he, "as I do not remember I ever did, or design to do any body injury, I cannot believe anyone can have a thought of injuring me. But if they have, I shall not forbear doing good whenever I have an opportunity." So saying, he took leave of the fairy and set forward again for his father's capital, where he soon arrived, and was received as usual by the Sultan, who constrained himself as much as possible to disguise the anxiety arising from the suspicions suggested by his favourites. In the meantime, the 2 women to whom Pari Bano had given her orders conveyed the sorceress into an elegant apartment, richly furnished. They first set her down upon a sofa, with her back supported by a cushion of gold brocade, while they made a bed on the same sofa, the quilt of which was finely embroidered with silk, the sheets of the finest linen, and the coverlid cloth of gold. When they had put her into bed, for the old sorceress pretended that her fever was so violent she could not help herself in the least, one of the women went out, and returned soon with a china cup in her hand, full of a certain liqueur, which she presented to the sorceress, while the other helped her to sit up. "Drink this," said the attendant. "It is the water of the Fountain of Lions, and a sovereign remedy against fevers. You will find the effect of it in less than an hour's time." The sorceress, the better to dissemble, took it, after a great deal of entreaty, as if she did it with reluctance. When she was laid down again, the 2 women covered her up. "Lie quiet," said she who brought her the china cup, "and get a little sleep if you can. We will leave you, and hope to find you perfectly recovered when we return an hour hence." The sorceress, who came not to act a sick part long, but to discover Prince Ahmed's retreat, being fully satisfied in what she wanted to know, would willingly have declared that the potion had then had its effect, so great was her desire to return to the Sultan, to inform him of the success of her commission. But as she had been told the potion did not operate immediately, she was forced to wait the women's return. The 2 women came again at the time they had mentioned, and found the sorceress seated on the sofa, who, when she saw them open the door of the apartment, cried out, "Oh, the admirable potion! It has wrought its cure much sooner than you told me it would, and I have waited with impatience to desire you to conduct me to your charitable mistress, to thank her for her kindness, for which I shall always feel obliged. But being thus cured as by a miracle, I would not lose time, but prosecute my journey." The two women, who were fairies as well as their mistress, after they had told the sorceress how glad they were that she was cured so soon, walked before her, and conducted her through several apartments, all more superb than that wherein she had lain, into a large hall, the most richly and magnificently furnished of all the palace. Pari Bano was seated in this hall, upon a throne of massive gold enriched with diamonds, rubies, and pearls of an extraordinary size, and attended on each hand by a great number of beautiful fairies, all richly dressed. At the sight of so much splendor, the sorceress was not only dazzled, but so struck, that after she had prostrated herself before the throne, she could not open her lips to thank the fairy, as she had proposed. However, Pari Bano saved her the trouble and said, "Good woman, I am glad I had the opportunity to oblige you, and that you are able to pursue your journey. I will not detain you, but perhaps you may not be displeased to see my palace. Follow my women, and they will shew it to you." The old sorceress, who had not power nor courage to say a word, prostrated herself a second time, with her head on the carpet that covered the foot of the throne, took her leave, and was conducted by the two fairies through the same apartments which were shewn to Prince Ahmed at his first arrival, and at sight of their uncommon magnificence she made frequent exclamations. But what surprised her most of all was that the two fairies told her that all she saw and so much admired was a mere sketch of their mistress's grandeur and riches, for that in the extent of her dominions she had so many palaces that they could not tell the number of them, all of different plans and architecture, but equally magnificent. In speaking of many other particulars, they led her at last to the iron gate at which Prince Ahmed had brought her in, and after she had taken her leave of them and thanked them for their trouble, they opened it and wished her a good journey. After the sorceress had gone a little way, she turned to observe the door, that she might know it again, but all in vain, for as was before observed, it was invisible to her and all other women. Except in this circumstance, she was very well satisfied with her success, and posted away to the Sultan. When she came to the capital, she went by many byways to the private door of the palace. The Sultan, being informed of her arrival, sent for her into his apartment, and perceiving a melancholy hang upon her countenance, thought she had not succeeded, and said to her, "By your looks I guess that your journey has been to no purpose, and that you have not made the discovery I expected from your diligence." "Sir," replied the sorceress, "your majesty must give me leave to represent that you ought not to judge by my looks whether or no I have acquitted myself well in the execution of the commands you were pleased to honor me with, but by the faithful report I shall make you of all that has happened to me, and by which you will find that I have not neglected any thing that could render me worthy of your approbation. The melancholy you observe proceeds from another cause than the want of success, which I hope your majesty will have ample reason to be satisfied with. I do not tell you the cause. The relation I shall give will inform you." The sorceress now related to the Sultan of the Indies how, pretending to be sick, Prince Ahmed, compassionating her, had her carried into a subterraneous abode, and presented and recommended her to a fairy of incomparable beauty, desiring her by her care to restore her health. She then told him with how much condescension the fairy had immediately ordered two women to take care of her, and not to leave her till she was recovered, which great condescension, said she, could proceed from no other female, but from a wife to a husband. Afterwards the old sorceress failed not to dwell on her surprise at the front of the palace, which she said had not its equal for magnificence in the world. She gave a particular account of the care they took of her, after they had led her into an apartment, of the potion they made her drink, and of the quickness of her cure, which she had pretended as well as her sickness, though she doubted not the virtue of the draught, the majesty of the fairy seated on a throne, brilliant with jewels, the value of which exceeded all the riches of the kingdom of the Indies, and all the other treasures beyond computation contained in that vast palace. Here the sorceress, finishing the relation of the success of her commission, and continuing her discourse, said, "What does your majesty think of these unheard-of riches of the fairy? Perhaps you will say you are struck with admiration, and rejoice at the good fortune of Prince Ahmed, your son, who enjoys them in common with the fairy. For my part, sir, I beg of your majesty to forgive me if I take the liberty to say that I think otherwise, and that I shudder when I consider the misfortunes which may happen to you from his present situation. And this is the cause of the melancholy, which I could not so well dissemble, but that you soon perceived it. I would believe that Prince Ahmed, by his own good disposition, is incapable of undertaking anything against your majesty. But who can answer that the fairy, by her attractions and caresses, and the influence she has over him, may not inspire him with the unnatural design of dethroning your majesty, and seizing the crown of the Indies? This is what your majesty ought to consider as of the utmost importance." Though the Sultan of the Indies was persuaded that Prince Ahmed's natural disposition was good, yet he could not help being moved at the representations of the old sorceress, and said, "I thank you for the pains you have taken, and your wholesome caution. I am so sensible of its great importance that I shall take advice upon it." He was consulting with his favourites when he was told of the sorceress's arrival. He ordered her to follow him to them. He acquainted them with what he had learnt, communicated to them the reason he had to fear the fairy's influence over the prince, and asked them what measures they thought most proper to be taken to prevent so great a misfortune as might possibly happen. One of the favourites, taking upon himself to speak for the rest, said, "Your majesty knows who must be the author of this mischief. In order to prevent it, now he is in your court, and in your power, you ought not to hesitate to put him under arrest. I will not say take away his life, for that would make too much noise, but make him a close prisoner." This advice all the other favourites unanimously applauded. The sorceress, who thought it too violent, asked the Sultan leave to speak, which being granted, she said, "I am persuaded it is the zeal of your councillors for your majesty's interest that makes them propose arresting Prince Ahmed. But they will not take it amiss if I offer to you and their consideration that if you arrest the prince you must also detain his retinue. But they are all genies. Do they think it will be so easy to surprise, seize, and secure their persons? Will they not disappear, by the property they possess of rendering themselves invisible, and transport themselves instantly to the fairy, and give her an account of the insult offered her husband? And can it be supposed she will let it go unrevenged? Would it not be better if, by any other means which might not make so great a noise, the Sultan could secure himself against any ill designs Prince Ahmed may have, and not involve his majesty's honour? If his majesty has any confidence in my advice, as genies and fairies can do things impracticable to men, he will rather trust Prince Ahmed's honour, and engage him by means of the fairy to procure certain advantages, by flattering his ambition, and at the same time narrowly watching him. For example, every time your majesty takes the field, you are obliged to be at great expense, not only in pavilions and tents for yourself and the army, but likewise in mules and camels, and other beasts of burden to carry their baggage. Request the prince to procure you a tent, which can be carried in a man's hand, but so large as to shelter your whole army. I need say no more to your majesty. If the prince brings such a tent, you may make other demands of the same nature, so that at last he may sink under the difficulties and the impossibility of executing them, however fertile in means and inventions the fairy, who has enticed him from you by her enchantments, may be, so that in time he will be ashamed to appear, and will be forced to pass the rest of his life with the fairy, excluded from any commerce with this world, when your majesty will have nothing to fear from him, and cannot be reproached with so detestable an action as the shedding of a son's blood, or confining him for life in a prison. When the sorceress had finished her speech, the Sultan asked his favourites if they had anything better to propose, and finding them all silent, determined to follow her advice, as the most reasonable and most agreeable to his mild manner of government. End of section 7.